we are not talking about a technical implementation here. So thanks for our previous colleague that talked about a technical implementation. We will be focusing more on the company side of things, if you want, organizational company side of things. Not because the technical implementation was not challenging or complex. We will spend a few words about it, but I think that is interesting something else. So first of all, I'll leave the word to Till, which is from Payback, to describe the company.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the warm welcome from ThoughtWorks and for having me here at the XConf. It's a wonderful conference so far. A little bit on what Payback is, about the problem domain, so to say, so you get the context and you can try to understand why we are opting for a data mesh implementation and so on and so on. Payback is by far Germany's largest multi-partner loyalty program. So essentially, in a nutshell, at Payback, you can collect loyalty points once you purchase at one of our partners that are big grocery stores, drugstores, online stores. Amazon is one of our partners in Germany as well. So you can collect and redeem points at Amazon as well. And we're operating across a couple of European markets with quite a large scale. And one of the top 3 shopping apps in Germany. The Payback card is very well known within Germany. Some customers might be annoyed if they're being asked for the Payback card. You might be used to that if you're shopping in Germany. But we are extremely successful in the loyalty business all across Europe. You might say, well, that is actually quite a simple problem domain, so to say, right? You can collect and redeem points. You can maybe activate coupons. That's it. Be aware that Payback's business model is way more complicated. We do connect with many, many partners, over 300 partners, let alone in Germany. We do offer dedicated FMCG-based services. We do offer affiliate-based business models down to things like mobile gaming within our app. So it's way more complicated. We have lots of different business streams. We're operating for almost 25 years now within Germany. So the business evolved and got more complicated, and of course successful as well.
And is a successful data company. So it's not that they are failing or going bankrupt. So they're very successful. And this is an interesting point because most of the time we position data mesh to solve an issue. To say, oh, you are not good at data, go to data mesh, or let's build something better. So they actually know something about data. And so the question why data mesh, I think is relevant because it sets another point of view about why adopting data mesh. Of course, it has been 5 years since we had this idea brought up by Jean-Marc Degani. We have also the book. And if you're a developer, you can see through those pillars that we were discussing before, many, many methodologies, paradigms, ideas that have been used in software for a long time. So data as a product reminds you microservices and reminds you service mesh to a certain extent. Domain ownership reminds you of domain-driven design, self-service infrastructure, EAC, and all the automation, CI/CD, and so forth. And further computational governance, all the things about security and how to manage it in an effective way. But at the same time, they are a bit misleading because most of the people think that this is a solution to a problem. So, okay, now let's adopt data mesh where I have to buy it. So I can look around, buy something, and I'm done. Cloud vendors try to position themselves as the solution. And actually, this is more an approach to a solution. And every time you need to implement data mesh or do something with data mesh, you need to build your own path through your own journey.
Yeah, why data mesh at Payback? Why did you opt for a data mesh solution? In a nutshell, if you really want to cut it short, it's about because data warehouse didn't scale, at least within our company. That does not mean that data warehousing, having a central data warehousing team in general, is a bad idea. It's a totally viable option for probably most of the companies actually out there. If your business domain is or the scope of your domain is rather small, it's all good. Go for a traditional centralized data warehouse team, and you will be happy and life is easy. However, for Payback, our internal data warehouses and our data engineering teams, so to say, didn't scale with a fast pace. how Payback business model scaled. Effectively, that meant that any changes within our internal data warehouse or data warehouses, actually, because we do have one data warehouse per country, they are very similar, but not necessarily completely identical. And any change actually took a couple of man days, months, weeks, years, sometimes really even years to actually implement. And we said, okay, we are a data-driven company. We essentially started we can say we started that business in Germany, effectively. Back then, I guess it was called database marketing, which is a funny term, which you hear nowadays. The scale of especially of our transactional data grew more and more, with more and more partners joining our program. But this is just a technical problem, right? You cannot solve all these technical problems. I guess if you are opting for data mesh, it's not about because your data warehouse doesn't scale in terms of workload, power, and so on and so on. We have been an Oracle shop for ages, and I mean, I'm not a big fan of Oracle, but Oracle Exadata is scaling like crazy. You pay lots of money for it, but it's really scalable. It's about the complexity of your domain and your business, essentially, why we have opted for a data mesh solution. And we want to reduce our bottlenecks within the data warehousing team. We wanted to speed up the analytics delivery, which is really crucial for us because our Payback partners, like the grocery stores, for example, they are asking questions on a daily basis, like how many people did this and that. Most of these questions are obviously being answered by using automated report systems and so on and so on. But there's always ad hoc work that we need to do, and that didn't scale as well, right? These sort of traditional things, why you're opting for a data mesh is we wanted to increase enterprise agility and empower the stakeholders. That means the so-called internal domains within Payback to maybe answer questions by themselves instead of always reaching out to a data warehouse engineer, an analyst, a data science, and so on and so forth.
And to give you a bit of sense about the scale we are talking about here. So correct me if I'm wrong, the last time we looked at the numbers, where they had, in production, roughly speaking, 90 terabytes of analytical data online, all around counting testing data, environments, and so forth. They have half a petabyte of data online. And they are an analytical company, so their business is to produce analytics. So, I mean, they're quite successful, of course. So when we say we want to accelerate in such a complex environment. So not because they don't know how to do their business, but because they need to do even more than this. So, and what is like to build data mesh in such a context? So we all wish to have such a thing. So greenfield, so no problem. You go there, you build your data mesh from scratch. No problem, you have your time to do stuff and so forth. Unfortunately, this is not the case. And the case was something more like this. So imagine you have to build a new underground inside a crowded city. This is actually the new underground that is undergoing in Milan. So you want to build the underground because you want to go faster from one point to the other of the city, but you don't want to stop the city in the meanwhile. You have to find your way through and introducing improvements without stopping everything, without crashing the entire city. And this is the challenge that we faced here. And the problem is that you need to plan ahead, okay, to do such a thing.
And maybe one additional information that I think is really, really crucial, especially if you're opting in for data mesh, is we didn't say, well, let's keep the company as is or our organizational structure as is, and then simply sort of adopt data mesh and do some data meshy things and then do data products and so on and so forth. What we actually did is, or where Payback came from, is we said, okay, we're coming from a sort of layered business architecture, right? You have IT departments and then product in between and marketing on top of it. And then we are a group of people that we really internally call business, whatever that term actually means. So this is what I would use to call a layered business architecture. And we said, well, maybe it's time to really reshape our organizational structure. And we actually applied, so to say, domain-driven design with the help of ThoughtWorks, like great ThoughtWorks colleagues, by the way, such as Brigitta, which helped us sort of separating our organizational structure into problem and product-oriented domains, right? We really applied domain-driven design effectively on a company level. So now we have a domain which is called loyalty. It's all about collecting points, redeeming points, nothing else. We have a domain about marketing, which is about, the term might be a little bit strange, but it's about issuing coupons, selling coupons to our partners and sending them to the customers, and so on and so on. And we do have a couple of sort of platform or infrastructural horizontal domains which are not actually valuable in terms of nobody pays for them directly. There is no partner or customer funding them, but they are needed in order to operate your business. These domains are we will elaborate on that on a later slide, are the cloud infrastructure domain and the data domain, which is actually a service or horizontal domain that is there in order to serve the needs for others.
One important lesson here is that domain has always the troublesome part of things. But we need to focus on the pillar, and the pillar is domain ownership. And the most important thing is ownership, not the domain. So we may debate long about domain, what is a domain and so forth. The experience in case of Payback, given the example of the crowded city, was not to disrupt the organization, not to say, okay, now let's change all this management. This management will go on the left, the other manager will go on the right, and based on domains, artificial domains. We kept the same organizational structure, but we refocused their mindset towards a different goal. In two ways, as Till was saying, focusing on, maybe they were looking after many things, let's refocus a bit more on specific things. That's one side. And the second mindset shift that was probably the hardest to do was shifting from a project-oriented mindset to a product-oriented mindset. I mean, project was working this way. So you have a need, you call someone in the tech side of things, you say, okay, I have to fix this. This person is allocated for 1 day, 1 month, 1 year to fixing this problem or implementing such a thing, and then it is moved to another thing. Instead, the real challenging part was to keep the same units, the same organizational structure, but inside those units, starting building new responsibilities in two directions. The first one was to appoint a trinity in each domain. So in each business unit, appoint a trinity that was responsible looking after this transformation. So this PO, and TO, business owner, product owner, and technical owner were at very high level in the business, not technical functions and support. So for each domain, one trinity. And the second thing was to build inside each domain, one team at a time, a product-oriented team. Moving people around, asking people, for example, for the first time, I think in Payback, to stay on the same project for at least 2 years or 3 years, I don't remember.
Or forever, maybe.
Or forever, but at least for a long period of time. And this was the way we tried to force a change without disrupting everything.
And maybe on top of that, if you want to build a data product, or if you want to urge somebody to build a data product because it is in the ownership of another domain, the responsibility of the data product lies primarily with the product owner, because I mean, it's a product, right? Not because the term is identical. But if you really treat data as a product, it's a responsibility, especially of the BO and the PO, to think about your own KPIs, right? How is your KPI defined? Not how is it implemented? That's a totally separate concern. But this is sort of the mental change that we were still undergoing. On top of that, maybe just a short information, we not only restructured our company in terms of a more domain-driven design approach of our organization model. In parallel, actually, we opted for a cloud migration. So we moved our whole infrastructure, or still moving it from on-premise to cloud.
Yes, they decided it was not so challenging just to implement data mesh, and they wanted to migrate in the meantime all the on-prem infrastructure that was about data and the presentation layer. So also the analytics, the dashboards and so forth. So at the same time, and this is interesting as well as a choice. Okay, so what does it mean? So the first part is the happy path, in the sense that, okay, you decide to go with data mesh, so you appoint someone to work on data mesh. And they work by themselves. They do their own stuff, they do what they think is the preparation needed it may take a long time. It actually took a long time, almost, let's say 2 years. 1 year is enough. And people got a bit angry of seeing some results, but they were just digging a hole somewhere without disrupting everything else, and so they were fine. And of course, this preparatory work is challenging because you need to decide what to do. And I think there are interesting lessons here. So if you want to,
so we basically started already sort of briefly touch base on this. We started establishing 3 core teams or sort of horizontal teams. We call them crews internally. One important team or crew was the cloud infrastructure team. This is sort of dealing everything regarding our cloud infrastructure, which is GCP based in our case. That has partially something to do with data mesh. But they are responsible that other application or software developers can sort of rather easily deploy applications, build applications in the cloud, and so on and so on. But it's a foundation for a data mesh as well. On top of that, we built the cloud data and AI platform team. So when we talk about data products, we always mean the combination of something with tables and something with models. So we treat tables and AI-based models as the data products alike, so to say. And this is a team who's really building up the foundations, the software and tooling, and the help channels and so on for data mesh itself. And last but not least, this is really, really crucial, especially if you're already coming with a backpack full of legacy debt from your legacy data warehouse. We have established a cloud migration team, which is starting to migrate or actually replicate assets from the on-premise data warehouse into the cloud. That does not mean that they are lifting and shifting the underlying ETL pipelines one-to-one into the cloud as well, because then you've just got the same stuff just in cloud, right? That doesn't make it more maintainable. It hardly makes it more scalable, because scaling, as I said, is not a technical problem. So they're really just they're just kickstarting so that we have some data assets or data products available in the cloud that, for example, analysts can start working. Because if there's nothing there, in our case in BigQuery, analysts say, yeah, well, why cloud? There is nothing there. I can't work with that, right? So that team is really crucial.
And I think there are interesting things here as well. So the cloud infrastructure team working on greenfield. They had no cloud infrastructure, so they started from scratch. And they were responsible of the security layer, so the compliance. And the cloud data platform and AI team started a bit later than the cloud platform team. And they were one of the main consumer of the infrastructure that they were building. So, of course, we had automated provisioning, sandboxing. Took a while to have those things. The most of the time we complained with them about the security because they didn't allow us to do anything. So we had to negotiate all those things. But at the end, after a long period of time, say almost 2 years, now we have a model that works. There is a clear responsibility, separation of concern. So they are responsible for making sure that everything is secure, no matter if it's data, application, and whatever. And we can play in our space about it. The second thing is that the cloud migration team was the first consumer of the data platform team as well. And so, of course, as they have done, and they were talking about in the previous talk, the cloud platform team built also the first data product. And it was a long story. And they built in the first data product and too much time to a certain set of expectation, but was normal. And so I was part of the cloud platform team. We ate our own dog food in the central sense, and we had the cloud migration team adopting our tooling. And while being on the run, because they had to migrate existing data to being able to lift and shift the analytical layer, so the dashboarding from on-prem to cloud, reading instead of Oracle BigQuery. So you can imagine the scale. And now they have all the analysts reading their dashboards from BigQuery while we are still developing this thing. And this, of course, forced the data platform team to face a series of issues, but also solve a lot of things. So we don't have a huge number of data product things. You mentioned there were 22.
Right now, we're on the ballpark of 22 true data products.
But we have, I think, less than 1,000 public assets in cloud. Yeah. Because they have to lift and shift a lot of data to make the analytical layer working accordingly and support from BigQuery. So these three separate teams, of course, meant for Payback a huge investment and required a huge commitment, I have to say.
Maybe a short word on another team, so to say, a rather informal team right now is the so-called Data Governance Council. Actually, we should call it Data Product Governance Council, because data governance, I guess, is an approach that scales beyond or sort of covers, is broader than data product governance itself. Nonetheless, what we tried is you can start thinking about data governance in lengthy details, very theoretical, data steward and all those fancy terms. What we said is, let's just put the most seasoned data engineers and data modelers, so to say, people essentially are working with data within Payback. Let's put them together in one room or virtual room. Let's meet essentially every week or every other week, and then let's discuss about new data products being built and then derive rules, policies, and we call it lightweight data decision records, so to say, out of these data products on the go. Because you can always start thinking, maybe I should have 10 policies up front or 100 of them, but you never know whether you're actually going to use them. So we really develop these policies on the go. For example, I mentioned the topic about how to handle PII data, right? You probably want to have a take on that, especially as a company dealing with customer data in Europe. So we have established a policy about data deletion. So this is really, really working quite well. And it's still a manual process. We have hardly any federated automated computational governance practices. And I think you need to start thinking. That's maybe the link to the keynote. And then you can automate later on. That's a tedious part. So
yeah, let's say the downstream actions are automated, but the upstream no. So the interesting thing here is that both about the platform and the governance is that we decided to build a lightweight DSL that was vendor agnostic and tool agnostic, but Payback specific. They have specific constraints. So for example, Payback data product needs to be deployed into 5 different tenants or in any number of tenants they decide, because and they should be isolated and you want to create 5 data products, or they have specific policies about access management to data based on tenant, based on data product, based on many things. So we created a DSL, both for the data products and the governance. And we put in place a very basic process upstream. So whenever someone has to create a new data product, does a pull request in a repository where there are those YAMLs and JSONs, Till is notified and his team is notified. They start a conversation about why you should build a new data product. Why are you reading from these sources and you need access to these sources? Who is going to read your data products? And why they are fine, they just approve the pull request and the downstream process is triggered. For example, they decide to use Dataplex security management for access management, but we are using that, and they are using Data Hub for the catalog. So the propagation of this information into those tools and the enforcement of security and metadata and so forth is done by the automation. But we thought that was very important to make sure that every new data product started a proper conversation inside the company. Then the tooling can evolve, then the things can evolve.
Maybe as a side note, most conversations we are having are about namings. People, especially data engineers, for some reason, tend to name their data products or their sources by the underlying vendor. For example, let's say we are importing some ad server data from some ad server vendor. For some reasons, we used to call them the tables by the name of that vendor, which is actually quite insane. And we're always having this conversation. No, what's in it? Not where is it coming from? What's the name of the vendor? Is it Google, Ad Server, Adjo, blah, blah, blah? What is in it, right? What's the nature of the data in this? And then you trigger and people start thinking about that. It's really, I think 90% of our discussions that we're having with the domains or internally are about naming.
And having proper descriptions.
And having proper descriptions.
That's the other problem.
instead of just copying the table name.
But of course, having a clear ownership. So you have at data product level, the team that has the TO and PO and sometimes also the BO, and they respond to the trinity of the business unit. So those decisions are not just made by developers, but developers having a proper conversation with all those layers. This is not slowing down the process, I have to say. Actually, is drawing the overall consistency, because the problem is that you don't want to create a bottleneck, but you want to foster consistency. Let's move forward. So, okay, now you have laid out all your things, and now you start digging. And when you start digging, problems arise in the sense that you discover that the cloud vendor does not fulfill all the promises that were there, and there are things that are more challenging or difficult. We were proud to raise many requests to the core team in Google about Dataplex because of failures that we witnessed in propagating security access. So you have problems, and you have problems also having teams adopting the things that you have done somehow.
Maybe one misconception that most of the time arises, especially when you're talking to sort of rather traditional focused data engineers, is on the subject of data duplication, right? Duplicated data in a data warehouse is like, you want to avoid it like hell, basically. Like, people are not used to that. They think, there's duplicated data, it consumes my storage, and you have two versions of reality. Well, yeah, you always have multiple versions of reality, sort of, or multiple views. For example, we at Payback, we do have the concept of a membership. Membership, you could say, is the customer who's the holder or the owner of a Payback card, which earns points, blah, blah, blah. Of course, the loyalty domain has a view on the customer, which is a very different view on the customer than the marketing domain, or maybe a data scientist, and so on. So you just need to embrace this kind of, call it data duplication or duality. I think in the data mesh book, it's called polysemes. That's a rather theoretical term on this. And it's totally fine to have duplicated data as long as you can trace it and you have proper data lineage. It gets messy when you can't follow your data anymore. And people are always asking this question, where is this coming from? If I shall migrate an ETL pipeline from on-prem and now I should own it because it's within my domain, how does the pipeline look like? Which sources do you consume? And then if you do not have proper lineage in place, which we actually didn't have for the traditional on-prem data warehouses, you need to start digging in your code and digging through weird PL/SQL routines and all that stuff. It might be mixed across Airflow, PL/SQL routines, maybe there's some Python in between, and so on and so on. That makes handing over data product ownership into other domains, which is what we eventually want to offshore, very, very hard.
Yeah, just a point on lineage, we had two approaches. So we decided to go with a lightweight lineage that we can extract from the data governance itself. So from the things that people were writing inside the data governance DSL, and also on the other side, choosing a data catalog tool that was capable of extracting lineage from the average tool that we were using. So for example, the Hub extract very interesting lineage from BigQuery, from Airflow, from whatever other tool. So in this way, we provided a basic lineage from the very beginning. And the more people were looking at lineage, the more we're eager actually to have lineage, as you were telling
Exactly.
yesterday. Yes.
Now people are constantly asking for lineage, and my recommendation is really start with your lineage, ship data later on. It's really the understanding what your system does currently is really, really not important. Maybe a quick take on this recommendation on building an intermediate data product. So as soon as you see a valuable opportunity to build a data product that connects data from multiple other sort of upstream data products, because this is data mesh essentially about, right? It's connecting multiple, maybe dependent data products in order to generate new data that makes this data valuable for the business, right? So that you can later on sell more points or whatever, coupons. We can build these intermediate data products, but they really need to be valuable on their own. And just the technical optimization, because that join might be costly for you, or you think it might be costly, that is not a justification, in my opinion, for an intermediate data product. That is just a technical optimization yes, you might say, well, if I'm going to do this join 10 times, 100 times, or 1,000 times a day, then it costs me money. But I think data product, this is for me not a proper justification for an intermediate data product. You need to create, simply speaking, something new. And just joining something that's just a technical operation. You haven't created something new. There's no business logic in a join markers.
And of course, this is challenging because that doesn't fit very well in a specific domain. Most of the time, those intermediate data products are cross domains, and they are challenging. So two things that we were discussing and learned so far was that, first of all, you need to appoint to this kind of task your best people, your best data engineers, your best data modelers, because they have to spot the right balance between what doesn't make sense to aggregate or put in an intermediate data product and so forth. And you need to plan for budget for this. It's not something that happens. You need to monitor it, and you need to make sure that you take the right decision. And connected to this, sorry, we are terribly late. We are almost done. Is that, of course, migrating from on-prem to cloud requires also a shift in the way you manage costs. Because on-prem, you do the investment upfront, and then in fact, I don't know, I would tell you, they have 50,000 tables in production because it's cheap for people to create a table and save it somewhere. If you do the same trick on cloud, it's a bit tricky because it will cost you more. Because on cloud, you don't pay the investment upfront, but you pay whatever you bring, whatever you do. So these also require a different attitude towards optimization. And don't get crazy about the size of data product. It's a mindset. So if you come from warehouse, you pay large data products. If you come from the college, you do it manually and differently and so forth. So there is not one size that fits all. So it's not just one table. It can be 100 table. Who cares?
The discussion is essentially the same as if you're having microservices or traditional applications, right? What is the point when you do cut an application? It's on a case-by-case basis. You can't say, well, if the code exceeds 100,000 line, that's just stupid, right? Or if the code base or the artifact is more than 100 megabyte or something, that would be a super stupid cut of an application. You need to cut by concern, maybe by the change rate or something like that. We are having these debates. We are not there yet. We don't have guidelines for it, but yeah, we're getting there, I guess.
Then there is another point. So the moment you have your cloud platform, your data product way of working and so forth, people will start using it. And if they are experienced data engineers, they have, I think you have 200 people in the data team.
Yep.
So more or less quite a few. They will start complaining. So the first feedback you receive from user, oh, this doesn't work, it's not correct, I will rather do it another way, and so forth. So the first lesson is that you have to prepare your data platform team to receive feedback and stay cool. Okay, it doesn't matter. So I remember the first handover we did for the data product was terrible. So they criticized everything. The team was absolutely upset. They had to intervene from top management to say, okay, let it come down and be pragmatic and see and so forth. But I mean, this is not an accident in my opinion. So it's part of the game. So adoption, internal marketing of the tooling, the data platform is part of the game. It's not something that may happen and so forth. You should plan to be able to sell what you have done.
I think we covered most of the stuff anyway. Maybe an important sort of learning from our side is in order to sort of shift left, it's always called shift and left data product ownership to other domains or to the domains where they actually belong to. We found it actually quite good working model is to distinguish between the data maturity of the domain. So in some domains, maybe due to the lack of capacity or whatever, you need to go for a fully centralized model. That means you still put the ownership of that data product, at least for an intermediate amount of time, in effectively a central data team. This is then team is very close to a traditional data.
And you need at least have the ownership of quality.
Exactly.
Setting the expectation of quality, at least.
We should not have many data products in that bucket, otherwise you failed. Then we have that contribution model where we say, well, we can actually help you on a continuous basis. We are going to put data engineers or data modelists and analysts into your domain for, let's say, half a year, and we're going to support you. Then you get less support in the expert support model, where you maybe just get a week of support by a data engineer. That works very well, but the rest is with the domain. And of course, where you wish to go for is a fully decentralized model where data product ownership, development, quality control, and so on,
Just download your tools and go along.
Yeah.
And the key point here is that you don't have to wait all domains to be at the same level to start, because that's the other misconception. So start as soon as possible shipping ownership, as much as they can. Of course, if you ship too much, they will push back. But in this way, at the end, you were able to involve all the domains.
Yep.
And of course, change management, the other point. So involve them as soon as possible, plan for decent documentation, but also decent learning paths, which is the other problem, because you think, okay, I've documented everything. I remember the first documentation we did was very, very detailed. So we detailed why we did this way, what were the problems with the underlying tools and so forth. So the first user went through the documentation, were shocked. So are we supposed to learn everything? Then we iterated, and I think that we have a very good learning path. So as a user, you have a learning path based on a sort of self-assessment about your skills. You know where to start from, what to deep dive, and so forth. But it took a lot of effort. I don't rather say as much as building a cloud platform, but a lot.
Maybe similar.
Okay, quickly, lesson learned, and we are almost ending because we are out of time.
Yeah, maybe one takeaway, because I guess we are running out of time more or less, is there is no reference data mesh implementation, right? There is no tooling that you can simply adopt. I mean, you're adopting data bricks and shaping it to your needs. It needs to be really closely tailored to your users. And one, maybe the most important takeaway for me is your users are most likely not data engineers anymore. Of course, they are still data engineers who are using your platform. But if you want to decentralize, you need to be aware that traditional software developers are going to build data products. Maybe they don't know what a SCDT type 2 historization is. Are they intellectually able to understand what it is once you explain it to them? Of course they are, but they don't know it. They maybe don't know what Airflow is or what a DAG is, right? Embrace that fact and build it not for a data engineer, but effectively for a normal software engineer, and maybe build different tooling for an analyst.
Different audiences, yes. Identify your audiences and build the tools that fit the most, make their life easier. We wrote a white paper about it. If you want to learn more, you can find on the ThoughtWorks website. So we can give a bit more details about it, but not the implementation. The implementation is the next chapter.
But happy to receive any questions about the actual implementation.
Exactly.
Just ask us.
Okay. Thanks.